The metal was cold against my back, not a bench this time, but the rusted hull of an abandoned sedan. I'd been hunkered down for 3 days, watching the world through the gap in the shattered windshield. The smell of stale gasoline and sun-baked upholstery a constant companion. The woods around my cabin had grown too quiet, too still, even for my usual isolation. That unnerving calm had been the first sign, a premonition that something fundamental had shifted. Then the whispers started on the crackling shortwave radio I'd kept for emergencies. Riots, unrest, strange illness. And finally, the silence. Utter, complete silence. My cabin was deep in the national forest, 20 miles from the nearest paved road. I'd built it myself, stocked it for years, a testament to a life I chose, not one forced upon me. Alex, they called me, in the rare instances I had visitors. Here, I was just me, a man who preferred trees to people, silence to noise, a man who knew how to live off the land, how to track, how to hunt. I thought I was ready for anything. I wasn't ready for them. The first one I saw up close had been 2 days ago. I'd finally broken cover, needing to stretch my legs, needing to move. My rifle, a .30-06, felt heavy and cold in my hands. I moved through the familiar woods. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig amplified. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural moan, more animal than human, but wrong, sickeningly wrong. It came from the old fire trail, about a quarter mile from my cabin. I hunkered down, heart thudding against my ribs, and waited. It stumbled out of the tree line, a man, or what was left of him. His clothes were torn, caked with mud and something darker, something glistening wet. His skin was gray, pulled tight over the bones of his face. His eyes were wide, milky, staring at nothing, yet constantly searching. And his mouth hung open, a perpetual rictus of agony or hunger. The sound came from him again, that wet gurgle, as he shuffled forward, one leg dragging, an arm swinging limply. A roamer. That's what the terrified voice on the last radio broadcast had called him. Slow, mindless, relentless. My stomach clenched. I knew him. Old man Miller used to run the general store in town. He'd always smelled of pipe tobacco and stale candy. Now he smelled of damp earth and decay. My finger found the safety, flipped it off with a quiet click. My rifle was pointed directly at his chest, but something held me back. This was Miller. This was a man. Then he turned, his head snapping to the side, though his dead eyes still stared blankly ahead. He'd heard me, or smelled me, a primal, instinctive awareness. He started moving towards my position, faster now, a lurching, uneven gait. The moan rose in pitch, a desperate, inhuman plea for something I couldn't give. He was maybe 50 yards away when I fired. The shot cracked through the quiet woods, deafening, violent. It hit him square in the chest. He stumbled, a cloud of dust and shredded fabric erupting from his body. But he didn't fall. He just kept coming, the moan turning into a choked gasp, a wet, rattling sound from deep in his ruined throat. That's when the terror truly hit me, not of him, but of the impossibility of him. He was still 20 yards away when I put a second round into his head. The .30-06 was overkill, designed for deer, for bears. His skull exploded in a sickening spray, a grotesque parody of a blossoming flower. He dropped immediately, hitting the ground with a dull thud, and finally, mercifully, went still. Silence descended again, but it was a different silence now, a broken one. The world hadn't ended with a bang, but with a wet gurgle and a single shot. I stood there, rifle still raised, staring at the crumpled form of what had been Old Man Miller. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I'd killed a man, even if he wasn't a man anymore. That distinction felt thin, flimsy, like a spiderweb, a hurricane. For the next few days, I stayed in my cabin. I patrolled the perimeter, rifle always in hand. I set tripwires, reinforced my doors. I watched the woods, waited for more, but nothing came. Just the ceaseless, suffocating silence. It made the cabin feel like a tomb. I was a ghost in my own life. Then the hunger started to gnaw. I had plenty of dried goods, canned foods, but my fresh supplies were dwindling, and I needed batteries for my radio, gasoline for the generator, things I couldn't grow or hunt. I needed to move. That's what brought me to this rusted sedan, parked on the shoulder of what used to be Highway 41. It was my second day out of the cabin, an uneasy foray into what had once been the town of Havenwood. Havenwood was gone, replaced by a tableau of still-life horror. Cars abandoned in the middle of the road, doors ajar, their contents spilled across the asphalt like a child's toy box. A grocery store with its windows smashed, a single shopping cart overturned. On the sidewalk, a bag of rotten apples scattered around it, and the bodies everywhere. Some were still, others I knew weren't. I'd spent the last 48 hours moving from shadow to shadow, checking every abandoned vehicle, every gas station, every general store. I found enough non-perishables to last me a few weeks, a few gallons of fuel, some spare batteries. But I hadn't seen another living soul, just the roamers, slow, shuffling, predictable, but still terrifying in their relentless, mindless pursuit. I'd learned to avoid them, to move quietly, to give them a wide berth. If I had to engage, it was always a headshot, quick and clean. Wasteful of ammunition, but necessary. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in angry streaks of orange and purple. The roamers seemed to stir more in the twilight, their moans carrying further in the heavy air. I needed a better hiding spot for the night. The sedan was too exposed. I scanned the street. The old Havenwood D. Inner, a greasy spoon I used to frequent, looked promising. Brick building, small windows, heavy steel door. If I could secure it, I might get a night's sleep without the constant paranoia. I took a deep breath, checked the chamber of my rifle. 1 round chambered, 5 in the magazine. My pistol, a Glock 17, was tucked into my waistband, 2 spare magazines in my pack. Knife on my hip, standard loadout. I still felt naked. I slipped out of the sedan, moving low, hugging the shadows. The air was heavy with the stench of decay, a sickly sweet odor that clung to my nostrils. A few roamers milled around in the distance, drawn by nothing in particular, just aimless wandering. They looked like grotesque puppets, their limbs jerking, their heads lolling. I focused on the diner, moving with the practiced quiet of a hunter. The front door was propped open a few inches, a dark maw. I peered inside. Tables overturned, chairs scattered. A few desiccated bodies, long dead, lay slumped over booths. No fresh signs of life, or unlife. I pushed the door open wider, rifle up. The smell inside was worse. Burnt grease, stale coffee, and something else, something metallic and cloying. Blood. I moved through the diner, room by room, clearing it. The kitchen was a disaster, food rotten in overturned refrigerators, flies buzzing around the putrid remains. No way to cook anything here. The back door was a heavy steel fire exit, thankfully intact. I dragged a few overturned tables and chairs against it, making a makeshift barricade. It wouldn't hold against a determined assault, but it would give me a warning. Back in the main dining area, I found a booth in the corner, its back to the wall, offering a good vantage point of the front door. I pulled the blinds down on the windows, plunging the diner into near darkness. I cracked open a can of cold beans, the metallic tang a poor substitute for a hot meal. The silence pressed in on me again, broken only by the distant moans of the roam. Ears and the frantic beating of my own heart. I ate slowly, methodically, forcing myself to chew. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps. My mind raced, replaying the last few weeks. The news broadcasts, the terror in the anchors' voices, the rapid descent into chaos. It had been so fast, so absolute. Then I heard it. Not a moan, not a shuffle, a cough. It came from the kitchen, a dry, ragged cough. I froze, beans halfway to my mouth. My hand was on my rifle before I even consciously registered the sound. My heart hammered. A survivor or something else? I rose slowly, rifle raised, moving silently towards the kitchen. The barricaded back door was still in place, so it was inside. I crept to the kitchen entrance, peering around the corner. A man was huddled in the corner, behind an overturned stainless steel cart. He was dirty, his clothes ragged, but his eyes were wide and lucid, filled with terror. He had a hunting knife clutched down and, trembling, he saw me, and his eyes widened further. "Don't shoot," he croaked, his voice raw. I kept the rifle leveled. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "Name's Ben," he whispered, looking utterly exhausted. "Came through the back. The door was unlocked for a bit, before I could barricade it. Didn't know anyone else was here. Been hiding for a day." I lowered my rifle slightly. "You alone?" He nodded. "Lost my wife a week ago. Ran into a horde. Didn't make it. Been hiding for a day." His voice cracked and he coughed again, a wheezing, painful sound. I kept my distance, but my posture relaxed a fraction. "Any bites? Scratches?" He shook his head frantically. "No, nothing. Just exhausted and hungry. Haven't eaten in 2 days." I tossed him a can of beans. He caught it awkwardly, his eyes wide with gratitude. He fumbled it open with the knife and began to eat, shoveling the cold beans into his mouth like he hadn't seen food in a year, which, by the looks of it, might have been true. "Alex," I said by way of introduction, "we secure this place. We stay here for the night. You make too much noise, you draw them." He nodded, mouth full. I watched him eat, my own hunger momentarily forgotten. Another face, another human. It was a strange mix of relief and renewed anxiety. People meant potential help. People also meant more targets, more mouths to feed, more chances for something to go wrong. I was a loner by nature, but even I knew that total isolation was a death sentence in this new world. We spent the rest of the night in tense silence, taking turns watching the windows. Ben coughed occasionally, a dry, irritating sound that grated on my nerves. But he was quiet otherwise, his terror a palpable presence in the small diner. The distant moans continued, a mournful symphony of the dead. The next morning, the world still looked the same. Gray dawn, scattered roamers. We needed to move. I had supplies to bring back to my cabin, and Ben had nowhere to go. "My cabin's defensible," I said, breaking the silence. "But it's a long walk, and we'll need to move fast, quietly." Ben looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. You're letting me come with you?" I grunted. "You got a better option? Besides, 2 pairs of eyes are better than 1, and you can carry some of this." I gestured to the meager pile of scavenged goods. He nodded eagerly. "Anything, just not alone, not anymore." We set off before the sun was high, weaving our way through the broken town, then into the dense woods. Ben was slow, his exhaustion evident in every labored step, but he pushed himself. We encountered a few roamers, but I managed to guide us around them, sticking to the thickest undergrowth. The woods were quieter than the town, but the silence felt heavier, pregnant with unseen threats. By late afternoon, we reached my cabin. It was still standing, still untouched. A small victory. I showed Ben how to use the tripwires, how to screen doors. "Secure the doors!" He looked around, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and relief. "You built this?" he asked. "This is incredible." "It's home," I said, putting my rifle down on the small table. For now. We settled into a grim routine. I taught Ben how to clean a rifle, how to set snares, how to identify edible plants. He wasn't a natural, but he was eager to learn. His cough persisted, growing a little worse each day, but he swore it was just a lingering cold. We made scavenging runs into the nearby areas, always careful, always silent. The roamers were everywhere, but they were still predictable. Slow, shambling, drawn to sound and movement. We learned to use their weaknesses, lure them away with a thrown rock, slip past them while they stared blankly at a rustling bush. Headshots for the ones we couldn't avoid. Survival was a grim dance, but we were learning the steps. Then, about 2 weeks after Ben arrived, the quiet started to change again. Not the unnatural silence before, real, but something more insidious, a lack of something. We were out on a scavenging run, near an old hunting lodge about 5 miles from the cabin. It was late morning, the sun high. Usually by this time we'd hear the distant moans, the occasional shuffle, but today, nothing. The woods were dead silent. No birds, no crickets, and no roamers. "You noticed that?" Ben whispered, his voice hoarse from his persistent cough. He was clearly getting worse, his face pale, his movements slower. "Too quiet," I murmured, my hand tightening on my rifle. Every nerve ending was screaming at me. This wasn't normal. We approached the hunting lodge carefully. It was a large, 2-story log cabin, much grander than mine. Maybe a good place for supplies, or a trap. I kept my eyes peeled, sweeping the tree line, checking the windows. The front door was ajar. Again, that feeling of unease. Too easy. I pushed it open slowly, rifle ready. Inside, the lodge was ransacked, furniture overturned, glass shat. Terrored. The air was thick with dust and the familiar stench of decay, but also something else. Something sharp, like ammonia. And the quiet. It was almost oppressive inside. "Clear," I whispered to Ben after checking the ground floor. He nodded, then let out a rattling cough that echoed loudly in the silence. "Damn it, Ben," I hissed. "Keep it down." He pressed a hand to his chest, wincing. "Sorry, just hard to breathe." We moved to the second floor, each step deliberate, slow. The upstairs had a few bedrooms, a small office. I checked the first bedroom, empty. The second was also empty, but the window was smashed inward, jagged shards of glass littering the floor. Strange. There were no signs of forced entry on the ground floor. "Up here, Alex," Ben called from the office. His voice was a strained whisper. I hurried over, rifle up. Ben was standing by the window, staring out. "Look." I looked. The window overlooked a small clearing behind the lodge, ringed by trees. And in that clearing, there were 3 of them, roamers by their appearance, but something was wrong. They were standing perfectly still, not shuffling, not moaning, just waiting, facing the lodge. "They weren't there a minute ago," Ben said, his voice barely audible. "I swear they weren't." My blood ran cold. He was right. We'd cleared this area, checked the perimeter. There had been nothing. These 3 must have approached the lodge while we were inside, and they were waiting, not just milling, waiting. Suddenly, one of them moved.
Not a shuffle, a twitch. Its head snapped to the side, then its entire body followed, pivoting with an unnatural speed. It looked directly at the broken window, not at us, but at the window, at the source of Ben's cough. "Get down," I breathed, pulling Ben with me. We dropped to the floor, crouching below the window frame. The moaning started then, but it was different, higher pitched, more aggressive, and it was coming from all three of them. Not
Just random sounds, but a synchronized, chilling wail. They started to move towards the lodge, still not shuffling, but with a more deliberate, almost focused gait. "They heard your cough, Ben," I said, my voice tight. "They hunted us." Ben's face was ashen. "But the roamers don't do that. They're slow. They're stupid." "These aren't," I said, checking my rifle. "These are something new." I crawled back to the window, risking a peek. They were at the base of the lodge now, not trying to get in, but running along the walls, as if searching for another entry point. Their movements were jerky, yes, but undeniably faster, more purposeful. My previous understanding of the infected, my rules, were already being rewritten. Then one of them, a woman with long dark hair, stopped directly beneath the broken window. She looked up. Her eyes, milky and dead, somehow seemed to see me. And she smiled. Or rather, her jaw unhinged, stretching impossibly wide, revealing teeth ground down.
N to nubs and a black, rotting tongue. It wasn't a human smile. It was the smile of a predator. And she began to climb. Not like a monkey, not gracefully, but with desperate, powerful jerks. Her fingers dug into the log walls, scraping, tearing. Her legs scrabbled for purchase. She was slow, but she was gaining ground. The other two infected below started pounding on the walls with their fists, a dull, rhythmic thud that vibrated through the lodge. They were trying to distract us, to draw our attention, while their scout ascended. "Holy hell," Ben breathed. "They're evolving." I raised my rifle. No time for philosophy. "Stay here. Give me cover if I miss." I lined up the shot. The climbing infected was perhaps 15 feet up the wall, too close. I aimed for her head, waited for a steady shot. My hands were remarkably calm. Adrenaline was a cold, clear drug. I squeezed the trigger. The 30-06 roared. The infected woman's head exploded, sending chunks of bone and gray matter earing down the wall. She lost her grip, falling with a sickening thud, hitting the ground in a tangled heap. The other two stopped pounding. They looked at the fallen one, then at the window. Their moans intensified, turning into a frustrated, enraged bellow. They started scrambling up the fallen woman's body, trying to use her as a step. "Back door!" I yelled. "We run!" We raced down the stairs, Ben coughing violently now, almost gagging. The sound was like a beacon. The two remaining infected outside the broken window had already circled around and were at the front door, clawing at it. Their movements were sharp, decisive. These were not the slow, shambling roamers of the old world. These were something new. Skitters. The name formed in my mind. Fast, twitchy, aggressive. We burst through the barricaded back door, sending chairs and tables scattering. The thudding and moaning from the front intensified. We didn't look back. We plunged into the woods, running as fast as Ben's weakened body would allow. "My chest," Ben gasped, clutching at his ribs. "Can't breathe." He stumbled, falling to his knees. I grabbed him, hauling him up. "Keep moving. We need to put distance between us." But the woods were not as safe as they once were. The silence was broken by sharp snarls, not moans, but a deeper, more animalistic sound. And they were close, too close.
Two of them burst from the tree line to our left, coming at us with an unsettling speed. They moved with a lurching, broken sprint, their arms flailing, but they covered ground incredibly fast. My rifle came up. I fired at the lead one, hitting it in the chest. It snarled, stumbled, but kept coming. The 30-06, usually so decisive, seemed less effective now. "Head!" I screamed, firing again. This time its head snapped back and it dropped. The second skitter was on us before I could reload. It lunged, a flash of gray skin and gnashing teeth. I slammed the butt of my rifle into its face. It staggered, but then its head snapped back up, teeth bared. It was stronger too, not just faster. Ben let out a choked cry. The infected had clawed at him, tearing a strip of fabric from his sleeve. A thin line of blood welled up on his forearm. "No!" Ben cried, scrambling backward. "No, not like this!" My blood ran cold. A bite. My mind flashed to Officer Liu, to the terror in his eyes as the gray spread. I pumped the rifle, aimed, and fired. The skitter's head exploded. It dropped like a stone. "Ben, let me see!" I grabbed his arm. The wound was shallow, more of a scratch, but the skin around it was already purpling. Infection. Not just from the bite, but from his cough, from everything. He looked at the wound, then at me, despair in his eyes. "Oh God, Alex, I'm sorry. I knew this was coming. The cough. I should have told you." "Told me what?" My voice was flat. "I got scratched a week ago, on my leg, when I lost my wife. It was just a small one. I thought I could fight." "It?" He looked at the purple bruise on his forearm, then at the older, darker, festering wound on his leg, hidden beneath his pants. "It's been getting worse. The fever, the cough. I just wanted one more day, not alone." My heart sank. He'd been infected this whole time, a walking time bomb. He hadn't been a liability. He'd been a carrier. And I hadn't seen it. My own complacency, my own desperation for human contact had blinded me. "Alex," he choked, tears streaming down his face, a mix of fear and resignation. "Don't let me turn. Please. I don't want to be one of them. Not like Miller." His eyes were starting to glaze over, that familiar milky sheen appearing at the edges. The gray was spreading up his neck. The transformation was happening fast, accelerated by the fever that had been racking his body for days. He was a skitter, or would be in minutes. Faster, stronger, more aggressive. I swallowed hard, the taste of ash in my mouth. This was the cost of human connection. On in this new world. This was the brutal truth. I raised my rifle. "I'm sorry, Ben," I whispered. My voice was thick, but my aim was steady. "You shouldn't have had to go through this." He nodded, a single, silent tear tracking down his cheek. Then he closed his eyes. I fired. The shot echoed through the newly reanimated woods, a grim punctuation mark on the end of another life. I stood there for a long moment, rifle still raised, staring at Ben's crumpled form. My stomach churned. 2 weeks, 2 weeks of companionship, 2 weeks of hope, gone, because they were changing, and because I was naive. The growling intensified. More skitters were coming, attracted by the gunfire, drawn by the scent of fresh blood, drawn by the sound of my grief. I turned, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand, and ran. My cabin, my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The world was shrinking, and the things in it were growing smarter, faster, more deadly. We were one step closer to extinction. The run back to the cabin was a blur of frantic movement and constant fear. I heard them, a chittering, growling chorus closing in from all sides. These skitters were nothing like the lumbering roamers. They were agile, weaving through the trees, their distorted cries echoing through the dense foliage. My breath hitched in my throat, each gulp of air burning my lungs. I pumped my legs, pushing past the pain, the exhaustion. Ben's death, my failure, fueled a cold rage that propelled me forward. I burst through the perimeter of my cabin, slamming the reinforced door shut behind me. The heavy wood vibrated as something slammed into it from outside. Then another and another, a sustained assault. I threw the deadbolt, then dragged my heaviest bookshelf against the door, wedging it tight. Through the narrow slits of my lookout posts, I could see them. A dozen, perhaps more, of the skitters. Their movements were jerky, almost spastic, as they clawed at the walls, slammed their bodies against the door. Or their eyes, though still milky, seemed to hold a flicker of something, a predatory glint I hadn't seen in the roamers. And the sound, a chorus of high-pitched snarls and guttural growls that made the hair on my arms stand on end. They were hunting me. They were learning. I reloaded my rifle, hands trembling. The 30-06 was good for range, but in close quarters, against these things, it was slow. I needed something faster. My Glock 17, with its extended magazines, would be more efficient. I checked the ammo count. Not enough. Never enough. For 2 days and 2 nights, I was under siege. They didn't let up. They tested every weak point, pounded on the walls, scraped at the windows. Their sheer persistence was terrifying. It wasn't just random aggression. It felt directed, organized. My carefully constructed sanctuary was becoming a tomb. I conserved my ammunition, only firing when absolutely necessary, when they tried to breach a window or were about to tear a tripwire free. Each shot was a gamble, a desperate attempt to buy more time. I watched them, studied their movements. They seemed to learn from their mistakes. A skitter that tried to climb a wall only to fall back after a shot wouldn't try the same spot twice. They shifted, adapted. This was evolution in fast forward. On the 3rd morning, the assaults lessened. The growling faded. I risked a peek through a boarded-up window. The clearing around my cabin was empty. They were gone, just like that. I waited, tense, for hours. The silence was back, but now it was even more menacing. What were they doing? Why had they left? Had they given up? The idea was laughable. They didn't give up. It was almost noon when I finally heard it, a faint scraping sound coming from underneath the cabin. My blood ran cold. Digging. They were digging. I cursed under my breath. My cabin was built on stone pillars, a foot off the ground. I'd never anticipated an underground assault. I grabbed my flashlight, dropped to my hands and knees, and crawled to the access hatch in the floor. I pried it open, flicking on the light. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the crawlspace beneath the cabin. And there, perhaps 20 feet away, was a growing pile of earth. A tunnel, and at the end of that tunnel, a pair of milky, dead eyes stared back at me. They weren't just faster and stronger, they were smarter. They were learning to bypass defenses. I didn't hesitate. I shoved my pistol into the gap and fired 3 quick shots. The tunnel went silent, but I knew more would be coming. This was unsustainable. My cabin was compromised. I had to leave, now. Packing was quick, essentials only. Rifle, pistol, ammo, water filter, medical kit, dried food. I stuffed my backpack, my mind racing, mapping out escape routes. The woods were no longer a sanctuary. They were a hunting ground. I waited until nightfall. Darkness offered cover, but it also masked their movements. A gamble, but staying was certain doom.
With a final glance at my home, I slipped out the back door, leaving it slightly ajar. A decoy, a last, desperate act of defiance. I moved into the woods, heading east, deeper into uncharted territory. My plan was to find higher ground, a place where I could see them coming, a natural fortress. The mountains. They were days away, but it was the only direction left. The first few days were brutal. The skitters were everywhere, and they moved silently in the dark. I learned to navigate by the stars, to trust my instincts, to smell their presence before I saw them. I slept in trees, tied myself to branches, trying to escape their relentless pursuit. My supplies dwindled, my energy flagged. Then, on the fourth day, I stumbled upon a small, isolated farm. A ramshackle farmhouse, a barn, a few overgrown fields. It looked abandoned, but safe, or as safe as anywhere could be now. I approached with extreme caution, rifle up, every sense alert. The farmhouse was empty, but strangely intact. No signs of a struggle, no blood, just dust and silence. I cleared it quickly, then moved to the barn. The large wooden doors were slightly ajar. I pushed one open, creaking loudly. "Hold it right there!" a voice barked, sharp and clear. I froze, rifle aimed at the shadowy interior. My heart leapt. Another survivor. A woman stepped out from behind a hay bale, a hunting rifle leveled at my chest. She was tall, lean, with short, practical hair and intense green eyes. Her clothes were patched, but clean. She looked like she could handle herself. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady. "And what are you doing on my land?" "Alex," I said, slowly lowering my rifle, but not letting go. "Just passing through, looking for shelter." She studied me, her eyes assessing. "This is Sarah's farm. What's your story, Alex? And don't tell me you're not infected. I've seen enough of them." "Not infected," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Haven't been bitten or scratched since the thing started. Just trying to survive. Had to leave my cabin. They figured out how to dig." Her eyes widened slightly. "Dig? You mean the skitters?" "That's what I call them," I confirmed. "Faster, stronger, smarter than the first wave." She lowered her rifle a fraction, a grudging acceptance in her stance. "I'm Sarah, and I've seen them too. They're changing. This farm was safe for a while, but they're getting more aggressive." "How long have you been here?" "Alone? About a month. With my family since the beginning. My brother Liam is out on patrol now. My mom and dad are inside." She gestured towards the farmhouse. A family? The concept felt alien, almost dangerous. I was used to being alone. But the exhaustion, the constant fear, made the idea of shared survival incredibly appealing. "You got a spare bed?" I asked, a wry smile playing on my lips. She didn't return it. "Maybe, if you don't bring trouble." Trouble, I thought, always followed me. But this time, maybe, I could. Wouldn't be facing it alone. The skitters were evolving, but maybe, just maybe, humanity could evolve too. Sarah led me to the farmhouse. It was surprisingly well maintained inside, a testament to her and her family's resilience. Her parents, Frank and Mary, were older, but still capable, their faces etched with the weariness of survival. Liam, her younger brother, arrived back shortly after, a silent, watchful presence who moved with the grace of a trained hunter. He carried a bow, a quiver full of arrows, and a worn hunting knife. Quiet, deadly. They had developed a complex system of perimeter defenses, tripwires, noise traps, even a small moat-like ditch filled with sharp stakes. They also had a radio, a battery-powered shortwave that Liam listened to religiously. "Nothing but static most days," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Sometimes distant whispers, other groups, always ending with screaming." I told them about the skitters,
their speed, their strength, their uncanny ability. Digging, about their digging, they listened with grim faces. "We've seen them getting faster," Frank said, his voice raspy, "and more aggressive. But digging, that's new." "They're adapting," Sarah concluded, her brow furrowed. "We need to adapt too." For the next few weeks, I became part of their grim routine. We hunted together, scavenged together. I taught them how to set more effective traps, how to ration supplies, how to move silently through the woods. They taught me the rhythm of their life, the small comforts of shared meals, the fragile hope of human connection. Sarah was a natural leader, quick-thinking, decisive. Liam was a silent sentinel, always watchful, always alert. Frank and Mary, despite their age, were anchors, reminding us of the world that was, the humanity we fought to preserve. But the world outside continued its relentless shift. The skitters were becoming more prevalent, pushing further into our territory. They were not just fast, they were developing. A strange coordination. We'd see small groups of 3 or 4, moving with a chilling synchronization, almost like a pack of wolves. They were no longer just shambling masses, they were hunters. One afternoon, we were on a scavenging run to a nearby hardware store. Liam, Sarah, and I, been standing guard at the shattered entrance, suddenly stiffened. "Quiet," he whispered, his voice taut. "Something's coming." We froze, listening. At first, nothing but the wind whistling through the broken windows. Then a faint sound, like distant whispers carried on the breeze. It grew louder, resolving into a chittering, guttural symphony. But it wasn't just the skitters. There was something else. A high-pitched, almost melodic wail. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her hand on her rifle. "Never heard anything like it," I muttered, checking my own. A weapon. A dark shape detached itself from the shadows down the street. It moved with a horrifying speed, not the jerky sprint of a skitter, but a fluid, almost glide. It was taller, thinner, its limbs disproportionately long. Its head was pulled back, its mouth a gaping maw, emitting that unearthly wail. Stalkers. The name echoed in my mind, a cold, hard truth. Behind it, a dozen skitters poured onto the street, moving with a new urgency, clearly directed by the wailing creature. The stalker wasn't attacking, it was leading. "Run!" I shouted, shoving Sarah towards the back exit. "Now!" We scrambled out, leaving our scavenged goods behind. The stalker's wail pierced the air, a sonic weapon that seemed to disorient, to paralyze. My ears rang, my teeth ached. The skitters were close behind us, their chittering growls a terrifying counterpoint to the stalker's song. We ran through the back alleys, jumping fences, vaulting over debris. The stalker's wail seemed to follow us. Sense, always close, always threatening. It was an intelligent hunt. It wasn't just chasing us, it was hurting us. Liam, who was faster, suddenly changed direction, darting into a narrow gap between 2 buildings. "This way! Shortcut!" We followed, pushing through the cramped space. The stalker's wail intensified, right behind us. Then, just as we cleared the gap, Liam stumbled. He'd stepped on a discarded pipe, twisting his ankle. He cried out, a sharp, sudden sound of pain. The stalker was upon us. It burst through the gap, its wail deafening. Its long, clawed fingers reached for Liam. Sarah fired her rifle, a burst of 3 shots that tore into its chest. The stalker recoiled, its wail faltering, but it didn't fall. Its flesh, though torn, seemed to absorb the impact with unnatural resilience. "It's not enough!" Sarah screamed. "They're too tough!" I aimed for its head, but its movements were too erratic, too fast. It swayed, then lunged again, ignoring us, focused entirely on Liam. My heart hammered in my chest. This was a targeted attack. Liam, gritting his teeth, pulled out his hunting knife.
As the stalker reached for him, he plunged the blade deep into its thigh. The stalker shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and staggered backward, momentarily stunned. "Go!" Liam yelled, pushing us away. "I'll hold it." "No!" Sarah cried, trying to go back for him. I grabbed her, dragging her away. "We can't! It's too fast! We need a plan!" The stalker, ignoring the knife wound, recovered almost instantly. Its attention was back on Liam. Its wail rose to a fever pitch, and the skitters, now closing in from all sides, seemed to respond to it with renewed ferocity. Liam, hobbled, was surrounded. We heard his screams, short, sharp, then choked off. Sarah broke free of my grip, trying to fight her way back. I had to hit her, hard, across the back of the head. She collapsed, unconscious. I threw her over my shoulder and ran, the stalker's wail and the skitter's growls echoing, lunging behind me, chasing me, accusing me. Liam was gone, another one, sacrificed, because they were evolving, because they were learning, and humanity was bleeding out, one life at a time. I was now carrying the weight of not just my own guilt, but Sarah's grief, and the chilling knowledge that the creatures we fought were becoming something far more terrifying than simple monsters. I carried Sarah back to the farm. Her parents, Frank and Mary, met me at the perimeter, their faces etched with concern. When they saw Sarah unconscious and Liam missing, their expressions crumbled. I laid Sarah down gently, then, with a heavy heart, told them what happened. I didn't spare the details of Liam's sacrifice or the terrifying new threat we faced. Mary started to weep, a soft, heartbreaking sound. Frank, his face grim, simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant tree line, as if expecting Liam to emerge at any moment. The silence of their grief was worse than any scream. Sarah woke up a few hours later, her eyes blazing with rage and despair. "Liam," she whispered, the name a raw wound. "He's gone, isn't he?" I could only nod. She cried then, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Frank and Mary held her, a tight, desperate embrace of a family that had lost too much. I stood awkwardly at the edge of their grief, an outsider, a witness to their pain. "They're not just dumb anymore," I said later to Sarah when her tears had subsided, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The stalker, it was leading them, directing them, and its wail, it was like it was controlling the skitters. Sarah nodded, her voice hoarse. "Liam told me they were getting smarter. He saw them doing things, setting up rudimentary ambushes, using obstacles to funnel prey. He called them apex instincts, pure predatory cunning." Apex instincts, a chilling term. It meant they weren't just reacting, they were planning. Primitive, yes, but evolving. We spent the next few days reinforcing the farm, turning it into an even stronger fortress. We dug deeper ditches, strung more barbed wire. But the new knowledge gnawed at us. If they could plan, if they could be led, then no wall was truly safe. The stalkers themselves were rare but terrifying. Their wails cut through the night, a psychological weapon designed to shatter morale. We saw them from a distance, lanky shadows moving with unnatural speed, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the moonlit sky. They never directly attacked the farm, but they scouted, they observed. We were prey in a growing game of cat and mouse. The biggest change, the one that truly drove home the terror of their evolution, was their ability to mimic sounds. One evening, as we sat in the farmhouse, the windows shuttered, the silence thick, we heard it. A child's cry. "Mommy, help me!" Mary gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Frank tensed, his eyes wide. "It's a trap," I said, my voice low and steady. "It has to be." but the sound was.
So real, so heartbreakingly human. Please, Mommy, it hurts. It's not real, Sarah said, her voice trembling. They can't do that. I knew better. The Skitters had adapted, learned. The stalkers were the next step. A predator that could mimic its prey, the ultimate horror. The cries continued, moving closer to the farmhouse. I'm scared. Please, someone help me. Mary started to rise. My God, it's a child. We have to help. No, I said, grabbing her arm. It's a trick. Don't fall for it. Frank, his face pale, pulled Mary back down. He looked at me, a silent plea in his eyes. He knew I was right, but the instinct to help, to protect, was primal. The cries stopped abruptly. A few seconds of unnerving silence. Then a stalker's wail, right outside the window. A mockery, a cruel, calculated laugh. The next morning, we found a doll, a child's rag doll, impaled on a stake just outside our perimeter. A clear message. They were playing with us. They were taunting us. The psychological horror was becoming unbearable. Our food supplies were dwindling, and a scavenging run was essential. But venturing out now was a death sentence. The woods were filled with stalkers and skitters, and they knew our movements, our patterns. They were waiting. We need a new plan, I said during one of our grim strategy sessions. We can't stay here. They're going to overrun us, and they're too smart for our current defenses. Where do we go? Mary asked, her voice small. There's nowhere left. The mountains, I said. Higher ground, natural defenses. We find a cave, a fortress, something they can't dig through, can't climb. Sarah nodded. It's our only chance. But getting there, it's a week's journey, maybe more, through their territory. We move at night, quietly. We avoid towns, stick to the wilderness. We bring everything we can carry. Frank, who had been quiet, finally spoke. I can't do it. Mary can't. We're too old. We'd slow you down. We'd be a burden. Dad, no, Sarah protested, her voice tight. He's right, Sarah, Mary said, her eyes surprisingly clear. We've had our time. You too, Alex, you have to survive. For us, for humanity. My stomach clenched. This was the brutal reality of the new world. Sacrifices were inevitable. But asking parents to stay behind, to face certain death, it was a monstrous burden. We won't leave you, Sarah said, her voice firm. Frank shook his head. You will. We've talked about this. We've prepared. We have enough food for a few weeks. We'll make it look like we left. Fake tracks. Distract them. He looked at me. Can you do it, Alex? Can you get them to the mountains? I looked at Sarah, then at Mary. The raw grief, the terrible choice. I swallowed hard. I'll get them there, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Or I'll die trying. The goodbyes were agonizing. Quick, tearful embraces. Frank and Mary, stoic to the end, urged us to go, to not look back. They promised to fight to the last breath. The last image I had of them was standing on the porch, waving, their faces pale but resolute as we slipped into the dense woods. The journey was a living hell. We moved silently, ever watchful. The stalkers were indeed everywhere. We saw their long, lanky forms flitting through the tree line, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Their wails, now a constant presence, seemed to echo from every direction. It was a psychological war designed to break our spirits. We discovered new horrors too, not just the stalkers and skitters, but something else. Piles of bones, stripped clean, arranged in crude patterns. Not human bones, but deer, bear, even other infected.
It was like a grotesque art installation, a warning. They weren't just killing, they were marking territory. One night, we stumbled upon an old logging camp. It looked abandoned, a possible place to rest. But as we approached, we saw them. Skitters. Dozens of them, not milling aimlessly, but gathered around a central figure, a new kind of infected. It was massive, bloated, its skin taut and discolored, bulging with grotesque growths. Its movements were slow, almost stately, but powerful. And from its body, a strange, sickening green mist seeped into the air, diffusing quickly but visibly. As it breathed, a deep, rattling sound. The green mist intensified. The skitters around it seemed to twitch, to grow more agitated, their movements sharper, their growls louder. "What in God's name is that?" Sarah whispered, her face pale. "I don't know," I said, my hand instinctively going to my rifle. "But it's something new, something worse." We watched, hidden in the tree line, as one of the skitters approached the bloated creature. It touched the mist, its body spasming violently. Then it turned, its eyes glowing with an eerie green light, and attacked another skitter, tearing into it with a ferocity I hadn't seen before. The other skitters seemed to watch, unconcerned, some even mimicking the aggressive movements. "It's a controller," I breathed, the realization chilling me to the bone. "It's giving them orders, enhancing them." This was the next step. The stalkers led, the skitters hunted, and now these bloated horrors, these architects, as I instantly dubbed them, were controlling them. A hierarchy, an organized force. Humanity didn't stand a chance. We skirted the logging camp, giving the architects a wide berth. The green mist, I realized, was a bioweapon, a pheromone, a stimulant. It was how they coordinated, how they directed the swarm. This wasn't just instinct anymore. This was a calculated biological advantage. Days bled into nights. We climbed higher, the air growing colder, thinner. The stalkers and skitters were less prevalent at these altitudes, but the architects were a looming threat, a silent, unseen hand guiding the nightmare. We found solace in caves, in overhangs, but never true safety. Then we found it, a massive cave system high in the mountains. Its entrance was narrow, easily defensible. Inside, it opened into a vast chamber with natural ventilation and a small underground spring. A fortress. "We made it," Sarah whispered, collapsing against the cold rock wall, exhaustion finally claiming her. I looked around the cave, then at the distant peaks, still shrouded in mist. We had escaped the immediate threat, but the architects were out there, expanding their dominion, evolving their army. We had merely bought ourselves time. "For now," I said, a grim truth hanging in the air. "For now, we survive." But survival felt less like a victory and more like a delay. Humanity was not just a step closer to extinction. We were teetering on the edge, watching our world consumed by an enemy that learned, adapted, and grew smarter with every passing day. The war was far from over. It had only just begun. The cave became our new reality, a cold, damp sanctuary against an ever-changing world. Sarah and I spent weeks fortifying, plugging the entrance, rolling massive boulders into place, camouflaging the opening with brush and rocks. Inside, we built a small fire pit, carefully routing the smoke through a natural fissure in the rock. We set up sleeping areas, organized our dwindling supplies, and explored the deeper recesses of the cave system, mapping out escape routes and potential storage caches. The silence here was different. Not the menacing quiet of the forest, but a deep, ancient silence, broken only by the drip of water from the spring and the crackle of our fire.
It was a comforting silence, for a time. We went on regular hunting forays, always careful, always watchful. The higher altitudes kept the skitters and stalkers at bay, mostly. We saw signs of them, gnawed bones, scattered tracks, but they rarely ventured so high. We were too exposed here, too easy to spot from above. But that exposure came with a trade-off, relative safety from the main hordes. Our biggest threat now was hunger and the relentless, untethered psychological toll of isolation. Sarah and I spoke little of the farm, of her parents, or of Liam. The grief was a fresh wound, but unspoken, a heavy shroud that hung between us. We focused on the practicalities of survival, on the next meal, the next patrol, the next day. But the world was still turning, and they were still evolving. One afternoon, returning from a successful hunt, a lean mountain goat, we spotted it. A stalker, perched high on a rocky outcrop, observing the valley below. But this one was different. Its head was tilted, as if in thought. And it wasn't wailing. It was making a strange chittering sound, rhythmic and complex, like a series of clicks and whistles. "What is that?" I whispered to Sarah, my blood running cold. "Communication," she breathed, her face pale. "They're talking to each other." The stalker on the outcrop repeated its strange chittering sound. Then, from another distant peak, a response. A different pattern of clicks and whistles. A different Agalog. My mind reeled. If they could communicate, if they could coordinate over long distances, then our mountain fortress was no longer safe. They could organize a massive assault. They could learn our patterns, anticipate our moves. We stayed hidden, watching in horrified silence for what seemed like hours. The stalkers were sending signals, relaying information. We were no longer just being hunted by animals. We were being tracked by an organized army. The architects, I realized, were the conductors of this gruesome symphony. They were the ones orchestrating this new level of evolution, using their bioweapon mist not just to stimulate, but to facilitate new forms of communication, new levels of cognitive function. This wasn't just instinct anymore. It was nascent intelligence. We retreated to the cave, fear a cold knot in my stomach. The silence inside felt oppressive now, not comforting. We were trapped. "We need to know what they're planning," Sarah said, her voice grim. "If they can communicate, they'll find us. We need to go down, to watch them, understand their language." The idea was insane. Descending back into the infected territories was a suicide mission. But she was right. Staying here, waiting for them to find us, was also a suicide mission. "I'll go," I said. "You stay here, hold down the fort. If I don't come back in a week, you move on. Go south. Try to find a larger settlement. There have to be others." Sarah shook her head. "No, we go together. We're a team, Alex. We survive together or we don't at all." Her resolve was absolute. I knew arguing was pointless. She was right. We were all each other had left. We prepared for a covert infiltration. Minimal gear, silent weapons, bow and arrows for Liam's old spot, knives, silenced pistol. We moved like ghosts, descending the mountain, back into the territories we had so desperately escaped. The journey down was harrowing. The stalkers were more active than ever. We saw them in small groups. Nests communicating with their chittering calls, moving with a chilling purpose. They were like scouts, covering vast areas, sweeping the landscape. We eventually found a vantage point overlooking a sprawling valley, just on the edge of what used to be a small farming community. And there, in the center of the valley, was an architect's nest. It was horrifying, a massive, pulsating mound of infected flesh, hundreds of bodies fused together, a living, breathing hive. The green mist billowed from it, a constant, sickening cloud.
Around the hive, thousands of skitters and stalkers moved in eerie synchronization, a vast, grotesque army. And the architects, there were not just one, but at least a dozen of them, lumbering figures moving around the hive, seemingly directing the others with their movements, their specific breathing patterns that modulated the mist. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice choked with horror. "It's a city of the dead." But it was more than that. The architects? There were not just one, but at least a dozen of them, lumbering figures, moving around the hive, seemingly directing the others with their movements, their specific breathing patterns that modulated the mist. Stalkers were constructing crude barricades, digging trenches, arranging debris. They were building defenses. They were preparing for war. And then we saw them. Humans, a column of them, perhaps 100 strong, marching towards the hive. They were armed, some with military gear, others with makeshift weapons. A ragtag army of survivors, desperate, brave. "They're attacking the hive," I breathed, hope and dread warring within me. "They're fighting back." But they were outnumbered, outmatched. The architects' coordinated army was too vast, too organized. The stalkers began to wail, a deafening cacophony that seemed to rip through the air, disorienting the approaching humans. The skitters surged forward, a tidal wave of snapping teeth and tearing claws. The battle was a massacre. The humans fought with desperate courage, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The green mist, I realized, wasn't just for communication. It was a potent neurotoxin. Humans who breathed it quickly became disoriented. The skitters surged forward, a tidal wave of snapping teeth and tearing claws. The battle was a massacre. The humans fought with desperate courage, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The green mist, I realized, wasn't just for communication. It was a potent neurotoxin. Humans who breathed it quickly became disoriented, sick, then collapsed. The architects were not just leading them, they were poisoning the battlefield. Sarah let out a choked sob as she watched, helpless, as the human defenders were cut down, torn apart, or succumbed to the mist. Many of those who fell, if not completely dismembered, began to twitch, to rise, to join the ranks of the infected, faster than anything I'd ever seen. The architects were weaponizing death itself. "We can't just watch," Sarah whispered, her hand clutching her rifle. "We have to do something, anything." "We can't," I said, my voice hollow. "It's too big, too many. We'd just be another casualty." But as I watched the last of the human defenders fall, a new rage, cold and clear, settled over me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about vengeance. This was about striking a blow against an enemy that sought to erase humanity from the face of the earth. "The architects," I said, pointing. "If we take out the architects, maybe it breaks their control." Sarah looked at me, her eyes wild with a desperate hope. "It's a suicide run, Alex." "Maybe," I conceded. "But it's the only chance we have. Not just for us, but for whoever else might still be out there." We spent the rest of the night planning. We would use the element of surprise, moving through the thick undergrowth under the cover of darkness. We would target the architects directly, using whatever explosives we had left, whatever ammunition. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. At dawn, under a blood-red sky, we began our descent. The hive was active, teeming with infected, but the architects seemed less vigilant, perhaps sated by their recent victory. We moved silently, each step measured, our hearts pounding against our ribs. The stench of the hive was overwhelming, rot, chemicals, and that sickly sweet scent of the green mist. It made my eyes water, my lungs burn. I could feel its effects, a dull ache behind my eyes, a slight dizziness. We didn't stay in it for long. We reached the edge of the hive, close enough to see the grotesque details of the fused bodies, the pulsing sacs, the black viscous fluid that oozed from its base. The architects moved with an almost ritualistic grace, their bloated bodies swaying, their raspy breathing a constant reminder of their control. 3 on the left, 2 in the middle, 4 on the right, Sarah whispered, counting them. 9. If we hit them all at once, maybe. I nodded. It was now or never. I pulled out the last 2 grenades I had, small fragmentation devices. Sarah had a few incendiaries. Not much, but it was all we had. On my count, I whispered. 3, 2, 1, go! We launched our grenades simultaneously. They arced through the air, small metallic messengers of death. They landed among the architects with dull thuds, followed by blinding flashes and deafening explosions. Chaos erupted. Skitters and stalkers shrieked, disoriented, confused. The green mist momentarily dispersed, only to reform thicker than ever, but our target was clear: the architects. We charged, rifles blazing, targeting the large, wounded forms. 2 of the architects were down, their bodies blown apart, oozing black fluid. But 7 remained, injured but still functional, their wails turning into enraged bellows. They turned towards us, their milky eyes, now tinged with green, fixed on us. The skitters, now without direct command, seemed to hesitate, milling around in confusion. But the stalkers, their apex instincts taking over, lunged at us, their movements more aggressive, more desperate. "Watch out!" Sarah yelled as a stalker lunged at her. She brought her rifle butt up, smashing it into its face, then fired a burst into its head. It dropped. I was reloading, my hands fumbling with the magazine, when an architect, its side blown open, staggered towards me. The green mist enveloped me, and my head swam. I felt a wave of nausea, my vision blurring. "Alex!" Sarah screamed, firing her rifle. The shots tore into the architect, and it stumbled, giving me a precious second. I shook my head, fighting through the haze, and raised my rifle. Aim for the head. It was the only way. I fired, not once, but 3 times, until the architect's head exploded in a shower of putrid green and black. It collapsed. We fought with a desperate ferocity, fueled by rage and the terrifying clarity of facing extinction. For every architect we killed, another 3 stalkers would swarm us. The numbers were overwhelming. We were getting pushed back, closer to the pulsing hive, the source of their power. Sarah screamed. A skitter had lunged from the mist, catching her leg. Her rifle clattered to the ground as she fell, clutching her bleeding thigh. "Alex, my leg!" The skitter was on her, gnawing. I turned, firing wildly, dropping it, but more were coming. The green mist was thicker than ever, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. My head throbbed, my lungs burned. "We have to." "Oh, go!" I yelled, pulling Sarah up. Her leg was bleeding heavily. She tried to stand, but collapsed, her face pale. "I can't," she gasped. "Go, Alex, leave me." "Never," I screamed, hoisting her over my shoulder. I wouldn't leave another one behind. Not after Ben, not after Liam. I ran, blindly, through the chaos, firing my pistol behind me, trying to create an opening. The architects, those that remained, were still bellowing, their wails somehow sharper, more piercing. Their control, though weakened, was still there. We stumbled through the mist, through the swarming infected, trying to find an escape route. The hive pulsed behind us, a constant, sickening rhythm. We were running out of time, running out of options. Then I saw it. An old logging road, almost hidden by overgrowth, leading away from the valley towards a distant ridge. A path, a chance. I ran, adrenaline coursing through my veins, Sarah's weight heavy on my shoulder. Shots rang out behind us. The stalkers were still in pursuit, their chittering cries a relentless symphony of hate. We reached the ridge, gasping for breath, my body screaming in protest. I lowered Sarah gently, her face ashen, her legs still bleeding. The green mist was beginning to clear from my mind, but the exhaustion was crushing. Below us, the valley was a sea of chaos. Infected still swarmed, but their movements were less coordinated, more frantic. The architect's wails were fewer, weaker. We had crippled them. Not destroyed, but wounded. A Pyrrhic victory. Did we do it? Sarah whispered, her voice weak. I looked at the hive, still pulsing, still a monstrous testament to their power. We bought ourselves time, I said. Maybe a lot of time, but they're still out there, and they'll keep evolving. We rested, patching Sarah's leg as best we could. The wound was deep, but not infected with the zombie virus. She was lucky. Or maybe, in this new world, lucky was just another word for surviving one more minute. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mountains. We were alive. But at what cost? Frank and Mary, Liam, Ben, all gone. Sacrificed to an enemy that learned, adapted, and grew smarter with every passing day. We had gained a reprieve, a moment of fragile hope, but the architects had shown us their true potential. A nascent intelligence, a coordinated army, a biological weapon. Humanity was no longer just fighting mindless monsters. We were fighting an evolving species that saw us as nothing more than prey or fuel. "Where do we go now?" Sarah asked, her voice soft in the twilight. I looked at her, at the raw determination in her eyes, despite the pain, at the distant, ominous silhouette of the infected hive. "We keep going," I said, loading a fresh magazine into my rifle. "We find others, we warn them, we learn, we fight, because if we don't, if we stop evolving, if we stop fighting, then humanity doesn't just get one step closer to extinction, it gets there." We rose, supporting each other, two fragile specks against the vast, broken landscape. The world was darker now, colder, more dangerous. But we were still here, and as long as a single human breath remained, as long as a single heart beat with defiance, the fight was not over. Extinction was always a step away, but so was another sunrise, another chance to survive. We walked towards the setting sun, two survivors in a world consumed by an evolving horror, ready for whatever new nightmare the dawn would bring, ready to fight, ready to learn, ready to exist.